thank you for joining us on Worldview. Now, the Republic of South Africa has drawn increased attention from the international community for its new approach towards solving a variety of problems and enhancing good governance in Africa. Such problems include poverty and alleged systematic corruption in the government. Now, the consequences of poor governance in government at the local level include high incidence of violence, decline in municipal service payments, and the deterioration in service delivery. It has been argued that municipal government must identify those areas of bad governance while serving as effective whistleblowers. Perhaps the starting point should be defining corruption and good governance. At a summit held in Johannesburg, some delegates argued that corruption and good governance sit at the opposite ends of the spectrum. While good governance represents the ideal for governments, corporations and nationals globally, corruption is a scourge that decent people, organizations and governments seek to eradicate. In simple terms, corruption involves the abuse of power for private gain. Actual acts range from a simple act of bribery, someone to skip a queue or bribing a traffic officer to avoid a speed fine, to serious conduct as the irregular award of tenders or even buying political patronage. The question now is, what will it take to end corruption and promote good governance? Renowned authorities on the issue of corruption and good governance are adamant that the single most important factor is the human element. In other words, the government needs to address human values and behavior. Now, joining me in studio tonight to talk more about this topic is the Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters and the Parliament Chief Whip, Floyd Shivambu. Good evening and thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having us today.
Very much welcome to the program. We've always wanted to talk to you on this program, and finally it has happened.
Yes, we had to come and share our views as well, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, getting straight into it, Parliament has now got newcomers. Obviously, the EFF, Ahang, and DA winning most of the seats in the past election that we had. What does this mean for Parliament, the Parliament of South Africa, now that we have perhaps what most have even said a more balanced?
No, look, I think the most significant development to happen in South Africa's politics since 1994 was the formation of the Economic Freedom Fighters and its election into Parliament, well, with 6%, and but there's changed the discourse of opposition politics, because for the first time in South Africa's Parliament there is a real opposition party which is not sharing the same ideas as the ruling party, because what we've had in the past 21 years has been just differences on personalities and few issues, but otherwise the DA, the ANC, the IFP and all these other political parties that are in Parliament share the same view. They actually even have a common program called the National Development Plan. They fight on who should better implement it. Now the EFF has come to introduce new ways of opposition politics that seek to hold the executive accountable and make sure that there's no continued sweeping under the carpet of incidents of corruption and bad governance, because the ANC has not been held accountable before. There are lots of things that have happened,
of which
scandalous levels, and
yes,
no one has been holding them accountable. That is why we say that the arrival of the EFF in Parliament is the most significant development politically to happen in South Africa since 1994. Okay,
now it is also not new that members of Parliament disagree, then end up getting physical with each other, and we have seen this in the Parliament, in the past sittings in the Parliament. What do you make of the South African Parliament with regards to that kind of behavior?
Now look, what the ANC has been doing was to utilize its parliamentary majority to suppress dissent, to suppress discussions. They easily resort to ordering members of Parliament to leave the House whenever they're disagreeing with them, or whenever they are demanding certain questions to be answered by the sitting president and by members of the executive. So they think now that when we refuse to be removed in Parliament, they will then resort to violence. The courts have told them that that is not how parliamentary democracy is handled. They are disparate because they want to hide corruption of Jacob Zuma. They want to hide corruption of the executive in many instances. So, and we stand up in parliament to say that he can't be let to go free even when the institutions of democracy have given him clear directives of what should be done to stop the corruption that has been.
There have been clear directives with regards to how to handle the president, and that has been completely ignored. Is that what you're saying?
That is what happens in most instances. The public protector has made lots of concrete remedial actions empowered by South Africa's constitution on what is to be done, what the president should do. Instead of him complying to all those directives, what he does, he institutes a second investigation by people, his junior, by people whom he has appointed, the Minister of Police, to basically rubbish and undermine all what the public protector, which is an autonomous body, has said. And we cannot allow a situation where there is no separation of powers, because once the executive accounts to itself and it does as it wishes, like Parliament, they use it as a rubber stamp, it means that the future of South Africa's democracy is under serious threat. And as this generation of economic freedom fighters, we're not going to allow South Africa to degenerate in the pattern and the form which Jacob Zuma wants to take it to.
And talking about the future political arena of the political state of South Africa, the ANC will rule for the next 4 years.
Yes.
And where do you see South Africa's political and economical future with regards to good governance? Is there any possible chance that perhaps the ANC will be taken over?
Look, we can say as a matter of fact that the economic freedom fighters is going to be government of South Africa. It's going to have a decisive majority
in
the
next
upcoming elections, because in the past there were no political parties that were vividly exposing the weaknesses and the incapacity of the ANC. We came into the picture 6 months before elections and we got 6%. And now we are working on the ground to conscientize the whole of society that what we have is a corrupt government which only thrives on the basis that it was a liberation movement prior to 1994. The only thing that they can offer people is the stories that they were in exile, they were arrested in prison and all those other things, but they don't have real solutions to the crisis of poverty, of unemployment.
So what does the EFF
and
have to
underdevelopment? That, look, the EFF says that we need to take strategic control of South Africa's natural resources so that we can benefit all South Africans. The fact of the matter is that South Africa continues to be a semi-colonial economy which exports all natural goods and services, does not beneficiate, does not industrialize, and you cannot have jobs if you do not have industries. Now we say as the EFF that let us be like all the other countries that have realized industrialization post World War II. Take strategic control of the strategic sectors of the economy, the mineral resources, the land, and then you will then beneficiate the mineral resources and industrialize them domestically in a way which is going to absorb the millions of young unemployed South Africans. But now South Africa is in a crisis of joblessness. It's no longer even an issue of unemployment, it's an issue of joblessness because there are no jobs for people. The economy is unable to absorb majority of its workforce. But the EFF is defining a clear path towards absorption of the entirety of South Africa's workforce.
And what is your approach on the land issue?
Look, our view is that the land of South Africa should belong to all South Africans. We speak today, 80% of South Africa's land is owned by white people, like white settlers, who had colonially dispossessed the African majority. So generation after generation, they are still in control of the land which they took through violent conquest of the African majority. And we say that because this land was criminally taken from our people, it must be taken back to the whole of South Africa, to all South Africans, without having to pay for it. Because what the ANC government has been doing since 1994 is to take money which was otherwise going to be utilized for other developmental interventions and buy land from few white people. And billions of rands have been spent on buying land from white people, but still less than 7% of that land has been reallocated to the black majority and Africans in particular. So we say that let us do to land what was done to the mineral rights in South Africa. You will know that prior to 2002, when the Minerals and Resources Development Act was adopted, all mineral rights used to belong to private companies and individuals. But the state was able to utilize political power to take all mineral rights. They are now under state control. And whoever wants to be in mining must apply for a license. Was saying, let us apply the same principle on the land question, because we need land for all of us, for development, for food production, for a variety of other things.
You've also learned a few lessons, or are you going to also try and emulate a few things that maybe the Zimbabwean government has done with regards to its land distribution in the country?
Look, the land redistribution program in Zimbabwe was mainly spontaneous. The government got to join into that land reform program after the people had already taken the land themselves. The land invasions in Zimbabwe were started by ordinary people, and government had an option to send the police or join the people, and he decided to join the people. So obviously there were lots of weaknesses because it was just a spontaneous land reform program which was not properly planned. It ended up with lots of other people getting disproportionate hectares of land as compared to others. But in our context, we say let us take land through a proper political decision that says that let us expropriate all land without compensation and redistribute it equally, and make sure that it is utilized productively for agricultural purposes, for industrial development, for human settlements as a way, in a way which is going to satisfy all people, not in a reckless way which is going to threaten food security, not in a reckless way which is going to displace industries and displace people who otherwise deserve to be in the areas which they are occupying currently.
Okay, now let's talk about one major concern that the whole country of South Africa has been reeling about. President Jacob Zuma's Nkandla home. Now, President Zuma has not fully answered how much public funds were used to upgrade his Nkandla house. And now experts say they want to decide on more upgrades. Is this true?
Look, in the middle of the construction of his private residence by government, Parliament said to President Zuma that there is a problem in your private residence. About 40 million has been spent already. And the original budget was about 19 million rands. And he ignored that.
Which all members of Parliament actually agreed to the upgrade of the President's house.
Like, look, at the beginning, government, there was nothing wrong with the security upgrades for 19 million rand. It was a reasonable figure in terms of what was expended on other residences. But when it went to 40 million, the president was alerted that this is getting too far now. He ignored it, and it went up to 250 million rand. Now, the public protector investigated and found beyond reasonable doubt, together with the Special Investigations Unit, found beyond any reasonable doubt that there was corruption in the construction of the president's residence, and then recommended certain actions and remedial actions that must be done to combat that corruption in Nkandla. Instead of complying to those remedial actions, the president ignores all of them, tells his Minister of Finance to go and investigate, and the Minister of Finance comes back to say that we actually must spend more money on one individual. And this is not his money. To be government or to be a president does not mean that the state money is your money. It's the money of ordinary people.
So what's the way forward now? Because the EFF has really made so much noise about Nkandla. Even during other parliament sessions, you have interrupted the president and said, Mr. President, you need to pay back the money.
Look,
so what is the way forward now?
Our affirmed position is that there's no Jacob Zuma who's going to speak in the Parliament of South Africa until he has paid the money, as instructed by the public protector. He's not going to speak in Parliament unless if he has paid the money.
What
That
are you
is
planning
our
to do?
approach.
Stop it completely?
Every time he comes to Parliament, he must first tell us and show us proof that he has paid the money as instructed by the public protector. We're not going to allow a corrupt president to come and address us and everything else must be fine. We must clap hands for him and applaud a corrupt individual. So there's never going to be any president who's going to speak there before he complies to the rules of this country, before he complies to the constitution. The public protector has spoken, he must comply, and then he can then talk to us. If we allow as parliament that things must go on as normal, then we might as well be dissolved. There's no need for a parliament to hold the executive and the president accountable. So there's never going to be any Jacob Zuma who will speak in South Africa's parliament in our presence, unless if he has paid the money that he has been given instruction to pay on. That is our approach, and we're not going to retreat on it.
Okay, now let's also talk about the Marikana report.
Yes.
The much-awaited Marikana report that came out, and apparently most people, like Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, that the miners were expecting that he would be charged for the deaths of the miners. The report came out and suggested otherwise. What is your comment on the Marikana?
Look, that Marikana report was a whitewash. But one issue which is important is that the report on Marikana confirms what we have been saying, that the mass murder, the massacre of mine workers in Marikana was premeditated murder. The police sat down and said that we're going to have tactical option 1, and blood is going to be spilled to stop the protest in Marikana. And the report confirms that. The Commissioner Mbombo, the Pierre, and the Minister of Police were aware. And we strongly believe that Cyril Ramaphosa, the Deputy President of the ANC, was part of the influence that the strike should be stopped in a violent way. Is there any clear
indication who actually gave that instruction?
Look, even the report of the commission indicates that indeed Cyril Ramaphosa sent emails to say there must be concomitant action. He defined the workers as criminals who are murdering people, and that the state must apply concomitant action against them. But also on many occasions, Mbombo, the phone records which were presented in the commission, point to the fact that Mbombo says that I have spoken to Cyril Ramaphosa, we need to act on this issue as a matter of urgency. But the Commission of Inquiry is not an institution within the criminal justice system of South Africa. That is why we are elevating the matter to the criminal justice system to take the issue to the police to start thorough investigations that will prove that Cyril Ramaphosa was part of the conspirators to murder the workers in Marikana. And he must be arrested, he must be held accountable, because if he had not put pressure on the police, if he had not put pressure on the Minister of Police and the Commissioner, there was never going to be the mass murder that was premeditated by government and committed in a callous way as it happened in Marikana on the 16th of August 2012.
Now, still talking about the loss of lives, on that one note, where people have lost their lives, we've also recently experienced a surge of xenophobia in South Africa, allegedly caused by King Zwelithini's hate speech that he gave to say foreigners should pack their bags and go. Can King Zwelithini be held accountable for crimes against humanity?
Look, our view on his utterances, we do not agree that foreigners must pack their bags and go and everything else. But after the explanation that he provided and the call for that the xenophobia must be stopped, we decided to believe him, that he didn't call for the violence and everything else. The violence happened in KwaZulu-Natal, in Alexander, relatively at a smaller scale than it happened in 2008 and in 2006. So it's a different issue and everything else. But what is an encouraging development is that the whole of South Africa stood firm to say that no to xenophobic violence. It cannot continue as usual, because the condemnation that South Africa received from other parts of the world, from African countries, from its citizens as well, was far much firmer this time than it was in the previous incidences of xenophobia. We do not agree that immigrants, whether legal or illegal, should be harassed by anyone, not even by the police. We do not agree. In our founding documents of the EFF, we say that we must explore many other ways to deal with the immigration question, which should include loosening up the issue of naturalizing people who have migrated for socio-economic reasons. The reality is that people all over the world, they move from one space to another in search of economic opportunities. And you cannot ignore that and say that people must be taken back to wherever they came from, because in any way, these borders that define African countries were colonially designed, were designed by the colonial masters who do not have our interest at heart.
Okay, now does the current government's foreign policy actually support that? Has President Jacob Zuma put in enough policies that actually promote South Africa's economy with regards to the foreign policy itself?
Look, there is no clear foreign policy direction that defines South Africa now. And unfortunately, since the departure of President Mbeki, the current government doesn't have the capacity to provide the necessary strategic leadership on the African continent. You will know that the major program in the continent now will be the implementation of the Abuja Protocol about integration of the continent. Certain due dates were set in the Abuja Protocol about building of strong regional economic communities, a common monetary union later on in the future, a Pan-African Parliament, an African Court of Justice, and a variety of other organs that were proposed in the Abuja Protocol. South Africa had played a leading role, even on the formation of the African Union and everything else. But now South Africa is lagging behind in playing a strategic leadership role to the whole continent in terms of establishment of these other organs of the African Economic Community. So it's a sad part because there is subjective weaknesses of leadership that is directionless and they do not know what to do with the African program. And that is why they react in the manner in which they do whenever there's xenophobia. They say, no, let us have Operation Fiela, which is basically about harassment of so-called non-South Africans nationals. It's not about crime, it's not about xenophobia, it's about harassment of non-South African nationals. So there is directionless in terms of clear foreign policy from the current government, and it's one thing that must be exposed.
And will the EFF give us a clear direction on this
Look,
foreign policy
as
if they come into power?
When we come into power, as part of our 7 non-negotiable cardinal founding pillars, is the development of the African economy, because we appreciate the simple fact that the development of South Africa cannot be separated from the development of the whole continent. We need to promote intra-African trade. We need to have intercontinental infrastructure, railways, roads, and everything else that connect the whole continent. We need to commonly generate electricity. The DRC has got capacity to could supply the whole continent with electricity with the Inga project. But someone else must say to the continent that let us integrate all our resources and generate electricity from DRC. We can have water infrastructure which can supply the whole continent. More than 60% of Africans do not have electricity, when we have got so much potential and capacity to could provide electrification for the whole continent. But it needs leadership, political leadership and political will from a willing political party and movement. And that political party and movement is the economic freedom fighters, because our founding values speak about the development of the African economy.
Okay, now because of time, I'm just going to quickly run through the few questions that I'm left with. Is the EFF's radical approach to politics a viable strategic tool? And is the party going to be relevant to South Africans in the near future?
Look, all political movements that have made breakthrough in history, they have to take a radical approach. And radical does not mean violent. Radical means that you are firm on what you believe in. You do not retreat easily. You are not easily intimidated. And that is what defines the economic freedom fighters. Because if we become easily scared and intimidated and easily retreat, we're not going to be able to develop this country. And we are relevant. We are growing by leaps and bounds. As a matter of fact, if elections were to happen tomorrow, we'll grow by
Have the
huge,
society seen something that you've actually done? Like, have you actually gone out to different societies and have done something that is tangible that we can relate to and say the EFF have changed ABC that we can actually see on the ground?
Look, since the general elections last year, the EFF is the only political party which has been having political rallies each and every month, and not small political rallies. We have been on the ground in almost all provinces. We're now going to have our second anniversary celebrations in the Northwest, and you will see the number of people who are going to be there because they believe in the EFF's guidance and leadership. All provinces, including the ones where we never existed before, we never had structures, in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Eastern Cape, we are beginning to gain much more stronger ground because the people of South Africa are saying that this is what we've been waiting for, and you must show us leadership in terms of where we must take this country to.
In one of my episodes 2 weeks back, when we were celebrating the Youth Month, I had some youths from the University of Johannesburg, and some of them were part of the EFF youth group. And they were talking about certain concerns that universities need to improve with regards to the, the well-being of students that reside at the university, and even those that are trying to actually get into university. Has the EFF done anything to help them? Because it was actually quite a strong debate. Have you actually put in any policies, implemented something to help those students?
We have got one of the most comprehensive perspectives on higher education transformation and making the learning environment much more conducive. We actually came on the 16th of June from launching the EFF Students Command, which is an organization on its own which focuses on the concerns and plight of students in all institutions of higher learning and post-secondary training institutions like the TVET colleges and everywhere else. So there's a dedicated focus on the transformation of higher education. There's a dedicated focus on making sure that the learning and teaching environment is conducive to all students, because majority of black students in universities and universities of technology, they've got hunger. They don't have food. They don't have books. They do not have computers, and they're expected to pass under those circumstances. And we're now taking up a struggle to institutions of higher learning to fight against financial exclusions, to fight against lack of residences, and they will realize also in institutions of higher learning that now a real student movement has arrived to fight for the inclusion of all students in an environment that will make them progress without hindrances. So that is what we're focusing on. It's one of our major programs.
Okay. Now, Mr. Shivambu said the last question, because of time we have to round up. A post-Mandela South Africa, what does it look like under the leadership of EFF?
Look, we salute and celebrate Tata Nelson Mandela for leading the struggle to bring about political freedom in South Africa. But political freedom without economic freedom is meaningless. That is why we need a new generation of economic freedom fighters which will lead South Africa to total economic emancipation. And total economic emancipation can only be brought forth by a movement which appreciates the conditions within which we are fighting the struggle. And that is the EFF. We're taking the baton from the generations that fought for political freedom, want to run towards the finish line, which is the attainment of economic freedom. And that is what defines our struggle. And we understand that struggle not to be a struggle of South Africa only, it's a struggle for the whole African continent.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for your time. That was Mr. Floyd Shivambu, Deputy President and the Chief Whip in Parliament for the Economic Freedom Fighters. Thank you for watching and good evening.